Hello and welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by Sam Tighe and Ali Maxwell this week, making his Edge of the Box debut, replacing his good friend, George Elek. We're here to preview all the Premier League's weekend action, and we're going to start with the biggest game of the weekend, which is probably Arsenal against Tottenham, the North London derby. Ali, going to give you an early touch of the ball here. This feels like the first time in at least a few years, actually, where both of these teams feel in a relatively good place and a relatively settled place. So it should make up for an interesting matchup.
It's definitely the most excited about this fixture I've been as a neutral for as long as I can remember. I mean, even the chaotic games where one team goes into it in concerning form, it never really fails to entertain. So it does feel extra tasty this time out. I was trying to be clever and think, I remember Nuno started quite well. I think he won his first 3 Premier League games as Spurs manager. Then I looked it up and they played Arsenal match day 6. They had just lost 3-0 to Chelsea, and before that had lost 3-0 to Palace. So I can't think of a time, as you've said, that this is kind of most exciting from a neutral's point of view. 2 really good teams, really positive fan bases who love their manager and who broadly are playing really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the Arsenal player rating so far for 23-24 that will flash up on the screen. Now, it's worth noting that before we get into this discussion, that we're recording this before Arsenal have played in the Champions League. So all the kind of selection dilemmas, we don't know what the team is at the time of recording for the Champions League games. None of us are ITK for Arteta's team selection. And in fairness, it's pretty hard to guess Arteta's teams at the moment. We had the big issue with the goalkeepers at the weekend. It was Raya versus Ramsdale. Bit of a statement selection for Raya against Everton. Arteta explained why it was that he put Raya in, because Ramsdale kind of knows the North London derbies, has played in a few now. Do you think he'll go back to him?
Yeah, so you've given us the caveat there, which is we don't know what happens on the Wednesday night just yet at the time of recording. But would it even inform us anyway? Like, there's still question marks, because if Raya plays on Wednesday night, it doesn't mean that Ramsdale doesn't play the North London derby. It might just mean that Raya was given the Saturday, or the Sunday, I should say, for Everton, in order to get himself into gear for the Champions League. So he wasn't going into the Champions League cold. You could also argue the other way round. We'll just have to see. And, I've been pretty consistent on this. Like, I don't really see too much between them. I think Arteta wanted depth, and I think he wanted competition of quality. And we're in it. This is it. He's just started talking about how he maybe regrets not substituting his goalkeeper mid-game. He is subtly arming us for something that is probably going to take course over the course of the season, which is who knows who's going to play. Who is number one? Is there a number one? Is it more like a dual 0.5? I think Arteta's trying to prepare us here. And I think he's actually been quite clever, mentioning the fact that he regrets not subbing a keeper. That means that when he does it, none of us go mad, because we're kind of expecting it now. So he's damage controlling from the off.
Or he's just playing kind of classic start of the season game where he's got 2 goalkeepers. He knows he's going to be asked about them. He wants to make sure that they're both motivated and training as hard as they can so that they can be number one. And maybe from, next month onwards, one of them will be the definitive number one. And maybe the questions will stop because they'll be the definitive number one without much argument. I mean, I like Ramsdale. I think he's a good keeper. I find him very entertaining. And I think I want him starting in derby games because you just know that he's going to have big moments, and mostly they go his way. Sometimes they don't. I think Raya could be a better keeper for Arsenal down the line. That's kind of my stance at this stage. But it's been so early. It's so early in the season. We haven't seen tons of Raya in an Arsenal shirt. But my hunch is that it'll be Raya long term. And I think that's why they signed him, because although Ramsdale had a good season and Arsenal had a good season, I think they want to try and find the best possible players to play in every position. And I think they're going to be cutthroat in that quest. So that's kind of how I see it at the moment, even though I realise the discourse around it has not really reflected that.
Yeah, Arteta likes to be an innovator, Sam. We've seen that previously in the last few years in the Premier League. It's all well and good, this goalkeeper stuff. But as soon as he changes it and one makes a mistake, that's when the dialogue's going to change, isn't it?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, probably the most scrutinised position on the pitch, and the position on the pitch where errors are most costly. So what Ramsdale absolutely did not need to start the season, with David Raya having been brought in, was what happened at home in the second game, really early on in that first minute. And like, it wasn't all his fault. Obviously, Saka and White, and there's a bit of a miscommunication, but he's just kind of caught out of goal. Just not what you need, is it? When they've just sort of picked up David Raya and committed to, okay, not a lot up front, but they're obviously going to make this loan permanent. And if they do so, it's to the tune of 25, 30 million euros. This is a serious commitment to a good goalkeeper. So, yeah, that's exactly how the chat's going to go. And for Ramsdale, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I think Ramsdale will start the North London derby, because I think that's a bit much for Raya to come into, even if he's got the 2 games as a run-up. So Ramsdale probably needs to go ahead and do what Ali said, which is produce a big Ramsdale moment, one that goes his way, preferably.
He had a few at the back end of last season, actually, where he made big saves in big games. The other selection issue, Ali, for Arsenal is probably Kai Havertz. He was left out of the Everton game as well. This makes me laugh because I think everyone talks about players being dropped. That's not what happens. There's rotation goes on in the Premier League. Players aren't going to play every game. I mean, I guess Saka will for Arsenal, but generally, Saka, Ødegaard. After that, Saliba, there's Declan Rice. There probably isn't, many more that aren't going to be susceptible to being left out in games.
Yeah, spot on, of course. And Arsenal's issue last season, if you can call it an issue, they had a phenomenal campaign and a brilliant points tally, but looking back, the big knock on them, or rather their weakness, if there was a major one, was maybe not having the rotation quality, or the players that came in being a bit of a drop off in quality from the first team, and it became such a repeatable style of play, a repeatable performance level from their starting 11, and maybe outside of that's where they struggled. So that has to be part of their development and progression to being a team that continues to challenge and maybe one day wins a Premier League title with Arteta. So these decisions are going to become more and more commonplace, and I think everyone would do well to understand that. I mean, I think that Fabio Vieira will start in that role, or at least I think he should start in that role. I think they'll start probably how they finished against Everton, and that was with Trossard on the left side of attack because of Martinelli's absence, with Fabio Vieira as the left-sided 8, and the normal 2 on the right side of that midfield in Ødegaard and Saka. I guess the other question mark is up front with Nketiah and Jesus vying for the number 9 shirt. But for me, Vieira's performance was so eye-catching, and people seem surprised about it, as if quality players don't sometimes need a bit of time to settle in and adapt when they join, when they join a club like he did from a different league. And for me right now, he's a more compelling offering than Havertz, who I've been trying for a couple of years now to just remind myself to forget the Leverkusen star that everyone was obsessed with and everyone fell in love with, because he was this kind of Swiss Army knife attacker that could do it all, and thrived in that system, because that's not Premier League 2023 Kai Havertz, and I don't think it has been for many years. I find him a strange player. I think he's a strange concept tactically when it comes to the Premier League. I've never felt like any manager or Havertz himself have really nailed down a spot where it makes complete sense and he contributes really well on a personal level. His body language doesn't fill anyone with confidence, and I don't think his performances have been particularly strong. This is judging him to really high standards because of the transfer fees that he has commanded and the teams that he plays for. So I don't want to be too harsh, but I think he's a good player. I think he's good in loads of different aspects of the game, but I don't think he's incredible in any aspects of the game. And I think for me at the moment, I wouldn't be rushing to start him if I was Arteta.
I guess it's that use of him. It's still, I'm not sure where he played for Chelsea ever suited him, but I'm not sure the position he's been playing in for Arsenal particularly suits him either. He probably needs somewhere in between, but Arsenal don't play with that formation.
Yeah, he's not going to raise your ceiling enough when you're talking about the best teams in the world to build a whole system around him. So
no, it's a signing that raised eyebrows. If he hadn't scored in the Champions League final for Chelsea, I guess his signing would have gone down as an unmitigated disaster, but he kind of, not stealing a living off that, but that kind of tilts it in a slightly different direction. But Chelsea weren't upset for him to go, were they?
No, they got such a grace period out of him because of that. Like, they were just like, oh, it's fine. He scored us the winning goal, that kind of thing, and that lasted for ages, didn't it? Look, I'm with Ali. Like I would play Fabio Vieira. I think he's certainly done more in the last couple of weeks to warrant a starting spot. And when you consider this game and what it is and what it means to the fans and how aggressive the first sort of 15 to 20 minutes are going to be because of the zip in the play, really what I'd be looking for from my starting players is that they're in good form and have good momentum and have good belief. I cannot say that Kai Havertz has any of those three things, but I can say that Fabio Vieira is taking his chances and that every time he gets onto the pitch, starter or as a sub, as an impact player, he makes us notice him. And that for me is enough. That's enough in the context of this game and what it means for him to get the starting role. I think if Havertz plays, it would be a little bit unfair on Vieira, but it would also be a signal that Arteta is going to be a little bit more defensive and cautious than we might have assumed, particularly at home. Because really the only thing Kai Havertz has shown us in terms of a strength at Arsenal so far is actually he's been very good off the ball. He's won a lot of duels in the final third. He's done a lot of counter pressing. He's actually very smart defensively, positionally, when you're in the attacking third. So, okay, are you going to lean on that? Are you worried about that? Is that the sort of game plan you're going for, or are you going to go for Spurs? Are you going to start quick? So, I expect Arteta to send out a team full of belief and full of commitment to playing from the first whistle, and I think Vieira sums that up much better than Havertz right now.
Yeah, Vieira was kind of the forgotten man at the start of the season, and he scored the winning penalty in the Community Shield. And you're right, whenever he's been on the pitch, you notice he's there. He wants the ball. He kind of takes the game by the scruff of the neck. And I think he's probably moved up the pecking order as this season has progressed so far. Let's talk a little bit about Tottenham then, Sam. Christian Romero had an improved start to the season, seems to have that little bit more composure nowadays, and he's actually the best rated centre-back in the Premier League, according to WhoScored. Nice little partnership with Van der Ven as well. They're kind of iron out each other's deficiencies, I would say, and that kind of makes for a nice pairing.
They're really good pairing. I've been really impressed with actually the entire Tottenham back five, if you just want to include Vicario for a second. Really, really nice defensive line. And connections between the players. Romero and Van der Ven, I think, have been really, really good. Little stat for you, 13 Spurs players have been booked in the Premier League so far this season, and Christian Romero is not one of them.
I mean, he's one you always put a bet on pre-game to get a yellow card as well, isn't he?
100%. And look, I'm not ruling it out in this one because this is a whole different ball game. But one foul in 5 games. Can I just give Christian Romero a theoretical round of applause here? Because it's just, thank you, Ali. Because he's not even overdue a booking. He's committed 1 foul in 5 games. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable. So, yeah, really impressed with him. I'm really impressed with Van der Ven because I didn't really know much about him. Like, he looks like he's going to be a bit slow, but he's definitely not.
Quick.
Yeah, and he's not slow at all. But because when he runs, it looks like he's straining every sinew to get above 8 miles an hour because of that awkward running style. It tricks you into thinking that he's cumbersome, but he's not. He's a serious centre-back. And these two together, the back four, I'm actually loving watching Spurs, and they're a big reason as to why.
Yeah, they're a good watch at the moment, Spurs, aren't they, Ali? And they found a way to win last time out. And again, all the discussions around Richarlison and Son. Richarlison comes out of the team because Son did so well centrally the game before. Richarlison comes on, and now the talk's going to be, they should probably put Son back out wide and get Richarlison up top. That's the nature of football, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. I would want Son back off the left for this game. Not necessarily for every fixture, but just for how I see Spurs needing to approach this one tactically. So for me, it would be Richarlison in for Solomon and Son to go out on the left. And I think Solomon can have a big impact off the bench. I think Spurs have players now who will start on the bench because not every attacking player can start. And you'll nod your head and be able to think, yeah, I could actually see them having a big impact. I think there's a question on the other side as well, where Kulishevsky's brilliant and what a great player to watch and a player clearly in good form. I would be tempted to start Brennan Johnson for this game. I've got a memory of opening day, Arsenal against Nottingham Forest, where Johnson had a great chance in behind that Arsenal defence, which he put over the bar, I think. But, if you want someone to exploit a high line, quick transition attacking, probably it's Son and it's Johnson in terms of the profile of Spurs players. So it'd be a massive call given he's only just joined. But just thinking in terms of horses for courses, I'd be kind of interested in that as an approach. I sort of see Johnson potentially being able to have a big moment in what should be a matchup where Spurs are going to have opportunities to break quickly, and if they get it right, should be able to cut through Arsenal. They'll also back themselves to create chances with more settled possession build-up play, which obviously is what Ange is trying to implement. It's hard not to be excited, really, on a tactical level for this game and all of the interesting selection decisions as well.
Is this where we're seeing Postecoglou's man management come to the fore a little bit, Sam? Because, the difference in between hearing Conte talk about Richarlison last season compared to hearing Postecoglou talk about Richarlison, and then after that's happened, he's got a goal and an assist and completely swung the game in Spurs' favour. Is that good management?
I think the general atmosphere around Spurs right now is the best it's been in years and years, since the absolute peak Pochettino days. And there is essentially one man and his staff responsible for that, and it's Ange Postecoglou. So, yes, you're absolutely right in what you say about Richarlison and his management of Richarlison's situation, the way he's spoken about it, the decision to speak about it in the first place, but in such a caring way, and the response that has elicited. I think you can look at a lot of these Spurs players who have clearly improved tenfold. Richarlison is one of them, sure, but let's look at Yves Bissouma. Let's look at Romero. Let's look at Pedro Porro, and you can say you've got
Sarr as well.
Yeah, Sarr. You've got positive stories left, right, centre, everywhere you look, and there's a root cause to all that, and it's very obviously the new manager in charge, who just about everybody except for maybe Arsenal fans, but even they're probably tested in this stage. We've all fallen in love with him, haven't we?
Yeah, it's been a breath of fresh air, actually, when you think about where Spurs were, and just listening to him talk, he's so engaging, and things are going well when you're making those kind of subs, and they do swing the game in your favour. I mean, Son's WhoScored rating was 5.98 last time out. Richarlison came on and got a 7.63. So whatever Postecoglou's done in the lead up to that game, because Richarlison's the kind of player as well that probably usually would react badly to being left out. He's given him a positive reaction, and again, that just shows the measure of Postecoglou's man management. Just final question on this game, Ali. What's the key area of the pitch for this one? Where is this game going to swing?
That's such a good question. I sort of think
Thank
that
you.
Like when you watch these games between the big six teams, I hate that phrase so much. Newcastle are one of the best teams in the country, and I suppose they're not really included when you say big six. So I need to sort of refresh my vote. And Brighton, exactly. And Villa. The games between big nine teams are just...
I read something earlier that said it was now a big 11. I read earlier.
Incredible.
Wow. Is that West Ham and Brentford?
I believe so, yeah.
How far do you go down?
Yeah, the big 11. Yeah. It's almost a big 10 of Man City, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think the last year or two we've been really treated, haven't we, with like some insane spectacles, and it's down to the way that the managers are playing. It's down to how they respond to the tactics of the other managers, and now we're just seeing these teams trying to bait each other into coming onto them so that they can have space and attacking behind, because managers like Arteta and Postecoglou get really bored of managing teams or managing against teams that set up in a low block. So I think these games are more entertaining than ever. And to me, it seems like it's basically the moments of transition that often decide them. There will be chances for both teams, and regular chances when they win the ball, to attack with speed and clarity and good combination play and create really good chances because the opposition defense is backpedaling. That's the football that I find really exciting. And I think both teams have a good chance of hurting the other on that front. So it's going to be hold your breath, basically, every time one of the teams loses the ball in midfield, because the next 10 seconds are going to be crucial.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how Arsenal do shape up in midfield for this one. Personally, that's where I think it'll be won and lost. Much would depend on the selection of Arsenal and whether they do get caught in transition or not, because we've seen with their shape at times, they can sometimes look a little bit short if a team does counter on them. So I think that'll be a really interesting area. Ali, you're representing George in the Predictions League this week. What are you going to go for?
I'm going to go for 2-1 to Arsenal.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. This is the game in my head where I'm always just like, right, well, obviously the North London derby is always drawn 2-2, which I think might have been the case, but it was about 5 years ago. Nowadays, the home side tends to win. But as we started the show with, it's very rare that in the recent history that we've seen the two teams look as in fine fettle as they do right now when they actually meet. So I am going to go 2-2. which is probably wrong because I think I've said that for the last 4 years in a row, so 8 times. But I'm due a win.
Well, the good news for you is 2-2 is what I was going to go for as well. So I'm gonna stick with that.
That's good news for me. That's good news for me.
Could be good news for George Elek, couldn't it? I think is he bottom at the moment? I haven't got the table in front of me.
He's embarrassing.
Bottom, yeah.
Let's look now at Burnley against Manchester United, and Sam Onana is getting some stick in certain quarters. It says here in the script he's looked small in goal at times. Is it deserved criticism? I've got to be honest, when I've watched him, I've not thought he was a major problem.
He's just definitely not in the top 5 list of problems for Manchester United Football Club right now, is he?
No.
So like he might not have stolen the show, but when you've got multiple players...
watch the Brighton goals back, Dan. It's ones where you go, oh, good finish, and then on the third replay you're starting to think,
can't say I noticed that.
Could you maybe got there? I had the exact same reaction to the script as you did, and then went back and watched with that in mind, and I was like, oh yeah. But I'm surprised.
I'm goalkeepers as well. Normally, I'm very critical, so I'm surprised that I haven't picked up on that.
I remember watching him in the Champions League last season and thinking it was a complete opposite. I thought his athleticism made it look like he could get to any part of the goal at a split second. So yeah, I'm interested to know
what's happening. Great save that he tipped wide that he had no right to get. Is it possibly what's going on in front of him and it not being settled? That being the problem, sir?
Oh, I think we can definitely say that what's happening in front of him is not good. I think, as I say, if you draft up your list of 5 biggest problems at Man United right now, it's at least 2, possibly 3 forwards or wingers embroiled in off-field controversies. You've got key defenders that are injured. You've got reports of certain players exploding at one another in the dressing room. Onana has been slightly below average in terms of shot-stopping performance. Opta's post-shot expected goals put him at about 0.4 conceded more than he should have. So not too far above or below the line. And well, we haven't seen too many of those raking passes. In fact, most of the raking passes, if he has any played any, they've kind of gone a bit awry. There's no doubt they're recycling the ball at the back much better, retaining the ball a lot better there, and his short passing is really good. The next problem for Man United there is that whenever they pass to Wan-Bissaka, the ball disappears. So that's not Onana's fault. Everybody marks everybody except Wan-Bissaka. Everybody lets Onana pass the ball to Wan-Bissaka, and then the ball disappears. They've got problems. He wouldn't be one that I'm drafting up. And I did a video for Who Scored on the YouTube channel for tracking Spurs' build-up patterns. So I watched the Spurs Man United game back. Actually, some of the passes Onana is firing off between the lines, low and hard, first time, setting him off. Brilliant. So that's 50% of his game, and they're getting parts of it. Maybe not the whole thing yet. But I'm not particularly worried about Onana. I'd be worried about almost everything else.
Yeah,
go on, Onana.
I mean, he's coming out of my fantasy football team ASAP simply because they're not keeping clean sheets. But I don't think that's solely down to him. He's the only one really letting me down in my fantasy football team at the moment. In front of him, Ali, you've got Martinez having to play without Varane at the moment, and he's looking less assured. But we're still living in a world where Victor Lindelof is in the starting 11 for Manchester United more often than not. Should we still be in that phase?
So you're smashing the predictions. You're smashing FPL.
Doing
Anything
okay.
you can't do?
I'm doing all right.
You just said he's the only player that's letting you down. Makes me think you're getting triple figures every week.
I've had a rare good start on fantasy football this year. Rare good start.
Look, Martinez is exposed because, well, in my opinion anyway, more down to issues within the team than his own massive drop in performance level, right? It's no surprise, and it's the case in any league for any team, that the defender that is as front-footed as he is, a little bit like Romero, to be honest, is going to have moments, high-profile errors, particularly of positioning, where it looks really bad because they're scampering back towards their own goal, they're behind the play, and the goal is scored because they pressed someone too tight, it was bounced off to someone else, they got turned, and that is really difficult for a player like that. So for me, it's much more down to the embarrassing structure in front of him and how often it's sort of collapsing, which I think exposes him. And more broadly, like, we're focusing on individual players here, but more broadly, again, not specific to Manchester United, I think almost any team in the world that has players who have performed at quite a good level, or at least a much better level, and then all of a sudden are all individually looking terrible, it is almost never worth like zooming in just on the players, because it's
That's
almost certainly something more structural, the bigger issues like Sam has discussed. And shock horror, when something changes, quite often a manager change or a change in or just a couple of wins, the same players are performing pretty well, sometimes under a different manager in a different system, but sometimes they sort it out and suddenly they look good again. So that's kind of how I come at it, and why so far Onana not giving him much stick, Martinez also not giving him that much stick at the moment.
Yeah, sorry, just to come in here as well. I think without Varane, Lissandro looks worse, because when you have a player like Lissandro who likes to step up and engage very, very high and take risks, it's really nice to be able to have a very good kind of recovery defender behind you. And Varane is one of the best, or has been one of the best in the world at defending in a similar way to Virgil van Dijk, where his defending style is to back off and back off and back off and delay. And that gives everybody else time to get back down the pitch and even the numbers out. What Lissandro does is he kind of just runs and jumps in. Now, this is, in my opinion, problematic, but he is who he is, right? Lindelof is obviously really struggling in the wake here of Lissandro. It might be better for him at times to calm down, but I don't think anybody's got the balls to tell him to change his style, because I don't think the results would be particularly pleasant for whoever says it. But when Lissandro keeps getting removed because he's like he keeps getting subbed, is too strong, but sometimes he gets subbed on a yellow after 45 or 50 minutes. And it's like, mate, come on. We can't keep doing this. You're a really expensive, really important part of the team. And when you take Varane off the back end of it as well to cover up some of that, it looks a lot worse.
Ali's right not to focus on individuals. It is the overall structure, but Martinez must look to his right and think, okay, you're still here then, to Lindelof. And now look to his left and think, Reguilon? What, what's going on here? And I thought their system was, I say interesting, probably isn't interesting to Manchester United fans at all, but Eriksen playing as a shuttler, is that his game?
That was a bad midfield. We don't need to talk about that.
No, I mean,
it was really bad.
Well, yeah, one of my notes is having Casemiro, Eriksen, Bruno Fernandes all in the same midfield trying to press Brighton is just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're completely right. And let's talk about Casemiro. Nobody's been dribbled past more times than Casemiro this season in the Premier League. 13 times he's been dribbled past. And Ali, he suddenly looks a little bit tired and a little bit old. He was so good last season, but he got off to an iffy start. But again, I suppose it comes back to we shouldn't be looking at individuals. It's the team setup. Watching
Brighton's first goal, pretty tough scene for Casemiro, as you say. It just looks slow and heavy and not perhaps as motivated as you would want your defensive midfielder to break his neck to get back in to defend the box, to defend the cross that is inevitably going to come in and is probably going to be a cross cut back to the penalty spot rather than fizzed into the 6-yard box, because those are the sort of patterns of play that we see a lot now. And that's his job to be the one to clear it away. And Welbeck was miles in front of him and scored. So, yeah, it does look like a bit of a problem on that front. The dribbling stat is really concerning. There was a part of me that thinks, is that the most important thing? Like, how often a game is a defensive midfielder being dribbled past? But actually, the numbers are quite high considering we're only a couple of games into the season. I still think, it could be circumstantial. It could be down to international break. It could be down to a poor conditioning over the summer. It could be something that in a couple of weeks' time looks a lot better. And I still think he's still decent on the ball. He's still positioning is fine. His passing is fine. And if he can improve whatever the problem is with his conditioning, could be back to being great again and perfectly good for this United team as he was last season. But of course, there is the potential for this to just be the twilight of his career. And he's played a lot of football at a very, very high level. Like Rafael Varane, you sign those players who have already won everything there is to win with Real Madrid and done so over the course of a decade. And you hope to get a year or two out of them where they just maintain those standards. But you can't expect that forever.
Is Ten Hag in trouble, Sam? We've got his last 10 results, or Manchester United's last 10 results against top 10 teams. Obviously, Brighton have dispatched them last weekend. Is Ten Hag in a little bit of trouble? I thought it was quite funny this morning that The Athletic had a big interview with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I feel like that interview's maybe been there waiting for the right time, waiting to get his okay for a while. And then just as things have started to go a little bit awry for Manchester United, Solskjaer probably thinks, this might be a good time for my interview to go out because it makes me look. It probably doesn't make me look as bad as perhaps I was. Do you know what I mean? Like, is he under any kind of pressure?
Oh, that's tinfoil hat there, Dan. Interesting.
In what sense? I don't think
Well,
I
I
said anything that
mean,
was
are
unreasonable.
you possibly reading into an innocuous interview?
I think there's
Something a bit
something
more
in that
nefarious.
type,
I don't know. We'll see. Do you think so? I don't think he's under too much pressure right now. I don't think he's in an unsafe position. I don't think that they're rushing to change manager when they're in the middle of a potential sale with, Jadon Sancho disciplinary issues and the Mason Greenwood situation and the Anthony situation. Erik ten Hag last season did a really good job, and part of that job was he prevented the ceiling of the whole club just caving in on the dressing room. He managed to hold it all together and the building stayed upright despite extreme pressure from above and from the sides. So I don't think all of that goodwill goes away after like 5 games.
No.
I don't think that would be. I don't think
you've lost 3 out of 5, which is pretty hefty for Manchester United.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm not going to defend him. Like I don't think he's done a particularly good job this season. Like the performances haven't been good. The structure's not been good. His response to the first 4 games was to switch to that disgusting diamond midfield against Brighton, and they got absolutely battered. Like, I can't say he's doing a good job, but what I guess I'm saying is that at Manchester United right now, the manager's job is not just about those results. Obviously, results are massive, but he is probably holding a few things upright here that they would be very, very silly to jump on too quickly. I kind of see United as like the Ents from Lord of the Rings. A long time to do anything particularly quickly at all. And if they are to fire Erik ten Hag, let's say this is the beginning of the end, not the beginning of the end.
If you think about Mourinho, Solskjaer, I feel like the first year was good, and then the same old problems started to creep in. At the moment, I would say at the start of the season, it feels a little bit like that for Ten Hag. I'm not disputing he did an excellent job last season, but there is a risk that the same pattern follows, Allah. I don't know if I'm remembering it right, but that's how I remember it.
No, I think that's fair. I was fairly positive about United before the start of the season, and it seems insane to sit here now thinking that was the case because of everything that's going on and has gone on. Not all of it is on the pitch, but even if you do just focus on the pitch, understanding that off-field stuff has a big impact, understanding that they do have a disgusting injury list on top of other absentees. I'm not saying it's easy for him, but it is also a tactical thing that's going wrong. On top of club atmosphere, on top of injuries, on top of poor squad building over a number of years. So, I'm now scrambling to remember why I was positive and thought United might, maybe be the second best team in the league now. I mean, wouldn't even have them in the top 4 right now.
I had them to come second. I had them to come third, actually. I had Arsenal a second, but I thought they'd be pretty close with Arsenal this season. But the way the season has started off, it doesn't look like it's going to transpire that way at all. Let's talk a little bit about Burnley now, Ali. And we discovered before we came on that I've watched every game Burnley have played so far in the Premier League this season and 4 episodes of the documentary. So I was all in on Burnley at the start of the season. And many people called them that they wouldn't really be in any danger. Out of the 3 promoted teams, they'd be the one that were set up the best. Vincent Kompany's very, very impressive, can talk up, can talk down. The way he speaks about what they're trying to build and how they're trying to bring players in, I completely understand it. But if you look at their most used 11 so far this season, there's only 3 players with any real minutes behind them in the Premier League. Does Kompany need to kind of tweak some of his methods and tweak and kind of just tweak things a little bit? Because they've a good point against Forest on Monday, but in the other games, they've been brushed aside pretty easily.
I would say no, definitely not.
Okay,
I think double down. Partly because you've watched the documentary, you know what happened last season. And a big part of what happened last season was the sort of player that they recruited. They did not follow what most relegated clubs into the Championship do and buy players that have been good in the Championship before. They bought players that they thought were excellent players, who were young, who would be dynamic, fit a certain style of play. And shock horror, they bought good players and they were amazing in the Championship, even though they hadn't played much in the Championship. They did have players like Jack Cork, who was obviously experienced. And I just don't see that being something that we can say definitively is an issue right now. I don't even know what we can, if there's anything I'm willing to say is a problem for Burnley right now. They have played Manchester City, Tottenham Hotspur, Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest. They lost against City and Tottenham Hotspur. You can draw a line through those games for pretty much any bottom half team, but certainly any team that comes up from the Championship in their first fixtures of the season. They were too open against Villa, no doubt about that, and that wasn't a very good performance. But Villa are a very good team, as we know, one of the best teams in this calendar year in the Premier League, and therefore by default in the world, right? I'm exaggerating a bit to make my point, but hopefully you're starting to see what's coming.
Absolutely love it.
And Forest away on Monday, to my eyes, quite clearly the better team, and the team
could have won.
More likely to win the game. The team that scored a good goal that was disallowed for unfortunate reasons or disgraceful reasons, depending on how you look at VAR and things like that. I'm not too interested in that necessarily. My point is, I think they've got exactly the results that you would expect realistically for them to get from those games. So they'll probably lose to Manchester United as well. Why, then they have no right to.
They might not
compete, or they might not. But what I'm saying is, even if they do, for me, it is way too early to be just looking at the points tally and saying something's massively wrong. And I think the other point is buying Premier League experience is presumably A, quite expensive, and B, if you're buying it, that suggests that someone's happy to let it go. So I don't really know what buying Premier League experience really means, which players that actually means. And if they had done that, it would have gone away completely from what had made them so successful before. So the way I see it with Burnley, with most of the teams that come up from the Championship, is that it's better to almost double down than make a lot of changes and potentially disrupt what's made you good up to that point.
Explained bloody excellently from Ali. We'll get him on again, Sam. We definitely were excellent
Very
explanation
good, yeah.
of Burnley.
Dan, would you like me to?
I was going to ask you actually, Sam.
Dan, would you like me to? Side with you. I can side with you a little bit here if you want.
No. I think he's actually debunked everything I said. Although I will say most of it was in the script. Sometimes when I'm wrong, I'm just reading what's on the script. It's not down to personal opinion. If it's wrong, it's not come from my head. It's off the script. But I wanted to say
the presenter's job is to tee up answers like that. So don't worry about how it makes you.
It was a great answer. I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. Sam, they've got some bright players though, Burnley, as we saw on Monday night against Forest.
They do have some bright players, yeah. Look, for the record, I did put them in my bottom three for the reason of that team looks too young. Now, this may be way too surface level for someone as smart as Ali Maxwell, but having not known too much about Burnley in the Championship, but knowing that they played a more expansive style and knowing that the age balance of the team did look a little bit young, it did skew a little bit young. I just, as we all do over 38 games when we have to guess the table, which is an absurd thing to do, really, but we all love it. I put Burnley in the bottom three. I also don't necessarily see any reason to change that because I think fundamentally they have been a bit naive tactically. Like the performance against Tottenham, going 1-1 across the pitch is usually a bad idea. It's definitely a bad idea when the team you're playing is significantly better than you. And they've now done it against several teams. So I'm hoping for their sake that there is some kind of adjustment, which is kind of what you're alluding to, Dan. Some kind of adjustment that can still allow those bright players that you mentioned to sing. And I wasn't familiar with Koleosho, but Jesus, that guy is fast.
He's good.
Goodness me. And if there's one thing a newly promoted team really, really needs is pace. They really need to be able to break on teams. If they do get hemmed in for 10 minutes, if they do have to ride out a significant period of pressure, if you don't have pace that can get you out of that, you are in so much trouble. I just want to see them deployed a little bit more conservatively, particularly against teams that are very clearly better than you. And that might give them a better chance.
Yeah, the two youngest teams that have been named in the Premier League this season both came from Burnley, and in fact, 3 of the youngest 5-team selections so far in the Premier League this season have been named by them. But that's the nature of what they're trying to do, as usual with these things. Probably the truth is somewhere in between the middle of what you two have said. But Ali has swayed me actually with what he said. I thought he made some excellent points. Let's get a prediction then for Burnley.
But Dan, Southampton just went down.
Yeah,
Southampton just went down with a bunch of awesome young players.
That's true.
The age balance was completely off, and once it went wrong, it was irretrievable. And so I think we've got a really good example from last season of why it can go quite wrong. So is there something you can do to fix it? And that's where I end up questioning Burnley. Truly.
Okay, I think that's fair. I do still think Burnley will stay up. I think there'll be 3 worse teams than them this season in the Premier League. Let's get some score predictions then for this one. Burnley against Manchester United. Sam, your turn to go first.
Interesting. I'm very tempted here, but surely quality wins out. Surely Man United have some kind of response. Let's go for 2-1 to United.
2-1 to United. I mean, United, as we've mentioned, we're recording before the Champions League. They could come away with quite a humbling at Bayern Munich, so that will play a part. I'm gonna say 3-1 to Manchester United though on this occasion. Allah?
Yeah, 2-1 Burnley.
2-1 to Burnley.
Situation at United, both tactically, but probably more importantly, spiraling off the field as far as I can see it. A trip to Bayern Munich, which, it's a bit silly for me to mention because by the time this goes out, the match would have happened. But broadly, whatever the result, it's going to take a lot out of their legs. They've got tons of injuries. And I think that Burnley's pace on the break can hurt them a lot. So I think the atmosphere is going to be unbelievable at Turf Moor. Imagine how up for it they're going to be. And I think they're going to win 2-1.
I mean, the handbrake is well and truly off in the George Elek camp with the predictions, but it's not George Elek taking the handbrake off. It's his good friend, Ali Maxwell. Let's do the rest of our predictions. Then we've done a couple already. I'll run you through the Premier League fixtures, and then we're going to predict each of us the score for this weekend. So first up, we've got a London derby, Crystal Palace against Fulham. I will go first this time, and I'm going to say 1-1. Ali?
It's the most 1-1 game of all time.
Yeah, 1-1 written all over it. Sam, are you going to join us at the 1-1 table?
Why not? 1-1.
1-1 as well. Luton, who we're going to speak about very shortly, against Wolves. Huge game there at Luton. Ali?
1-0 Luton.
I'm going to go for another 1-1, I think. Sam?
1-0 to Wolves then.
1-0 to Wolves.
Is this why you're top of the table, Dan? Because you say 1-1 for every game, and that's the most regular scoreline.
Jonathan Wilson's usual tactic, actually. He's been doing that for years, but it doesn't seem to be working for him so far. Manchester City against Forest, Sam?
4-0 to Man City.
3-0.
I'm going to go 3-1 to Manchester City. Brentford against Everton, which is the tea time offering on Sky Sports. Can't see Everton getting anything there. I'm going to go for Brentford 2, Everton 0. Sam?
2-1 to Brentford.
1-0 Brentford.
Brighton and Hove Albion against Bournemouth, Allah?
1-1. I think bit of a first ever European game hangover. 1-1.
Logical to be fair, Sam?
Yeah, I like that logic. I like it so much. I'm going to ignore it, despite the fact that my brain is screaming at me to tell to follow suit. I'm going to take the Brighton win. I'm going to go for 2-1.
I was going to go 3-1 to Brighton, so I'll stick with that despite Ali's logic. Chelsea against Villa, Sam?
So Villa beat the bad teams and lose to the good teams. So what are Chelsea?
I don't know. I don't want to say.
Yeah, so 1-1.
1-1. Okay.
I'm going to go 1-0 to Aston Villa.
1-0 to Villa. I'm going to go for 2-0 to Villa, the same as last season. I mean, I'm jinxing it completely here, but I watch Chelsea and just think, I'm not sure they actually know where the goal is. They're just one of the most poorest teams I've ever seen in my life in front of goal. Liverpool against West Ham. I'm going to go for 2-1 to Liverpool. Sam?
Yeah, 3-1 Liverpool.
4-1 Liverpool.
4-1 to Liverpool. That's big. That's a bold prediction. That is. George will be fuming at that one, I reckon, when he watches this back. Finally, we've got Sheffield United against Newcastle. Ali, you go first this time.
I think it will be 2-0 to Newcastle.
1-0 Newcastle.
Exactly what I was going to say, so I'll stick with it. I was going to go 1-0 to Newcastle as well. We're going to finish this week's Edge of the Box by looking at Luton Town. Tough start for them, in the Premier League so far this season. 0 points on the board, Ali. Is there anything they can take heart from so far?
You won't be surprised to hear that I think, yes, there is a lot that they can take heart from. I think that in their sort of context as a newly promoted team with such low resources and having not splashed the cash like a lot of teams do, I think that their performance away at Fulham in that 1-0 defeat was good, about as good as away performance as you'd expect. And I think if they put in that sort of performance away at teams like Fulham, they will not lose all their away games. But outside of that, it's very similar vibes to what I just said about Burnley, in that I don't care about Luton losing away at Brighton on opening day.
They actually played really well in that game. That game could have gone differently. They missed good chances at crucial times in that one.
Yeah, missed good chance against Fulham. I don't care about them losing away at Chelsea, particularly. And They've played 3 of their 4 games away from home. They've played a game less than all the other most of the other teams in the division. And the away games aren't likely where a team that stays up, having been promoted, picks up the majority of their points. Obviously, it doesn't hurt. But last season, we can look at 2 pretty good examples. Nottingham Forest didn't get relegated. They won 1 of 19 away from home. Everton didn't get relegated. They won 2 of 19 away from home. So away games have been, how they've started the season. I'm not too worried about it. And I think if you watch the game against Fulham, if you watch the game against West Ham, and maybe even that one against Brighton, Dan, that you mentioned, there's so much rubbish being tweeted about Luton Town, and it's so lazy and stupid. And I think if you watch those games and you think this is a terrible Premier League football team or just a terrible football team, I think that's what you're being. I think you're being lazy and stupid.
Yeah, they've got a good manager as well. Rob Edwards done an incredible job there. Did some good work previously in the EFL as well. Sam, the 3 games that they've got coming up, or 3 games that they have coming up: Wolves at home, Everton away, Burnley at home. Ali said he's not worried about some of the games they've lost. What should they be looking to get points-wise from those 3?
I mean, Rob Edwards would probably refuse to put a points tally on it, right? In terms of an aim, he'd just try and get better and better. I don't know what kind of fixture actually suits Luton the best. We tend to look at that run of fixtures there. We look at the caliber of the teams that they're going to face and assume that you're more likely to get the points against the lower ranked sides, which is usually true. Luton are very embedded in their style, though, aren't they? They don't necessarily, they're not fussed about having the ball. They're more than happy for you to have the ball. They just want to break on you and where possible, and use the destructive presences in midfield, and then use the speed they've got to transition. And they've got loads of it, haven't they, from the wing backs and the forwards, that they're pretty well equipped to do what they're going to do. And that isn't going to change in any of the 38 games. To me, it looks like the sort of template that can result in survival. So then where they might fall down is, unfortunately, it's the old argument of quality. Are you good enough to actually get those points on the board? No issue with their setup. I cannot levy the same accusations at them that I do at Burnley, where I say Burnley are a bit naive and a bit too risky. I don't think that's the case with Luton, and I don't think they're being unambitious either by wanting to play on the break. And because I've seen that bandied around too. I'd be concerned at just a general lack of quality in terms of getting over the line, which is a very fair concern when you consider that they do work within their means. They don't spend big money. They absolutely don't push the boat out and risk the club's future on these things. That's not being unambitious. That's just being realistic. So, yeah, I'd like to see them pick up a couple of points, because the longer you stay on 0, I mean, obviously the harder it gets, but the darker the cloud becomes. But Palace went 8 games and they lost the first 8 and stayed up.
Mate, last season, I've done my research here. Wolves only won 1 of their first 9. They stayed up. Forest only won 1 of their first 9. They had 5 points from 10 games and they stayed up. Like, people want to make early conclusions and they want to relegate teams, and it's just not worth doing so. It's just not how football works. If you are gunning for the title or the top 4 and you're dropping points in August and September, that can be very terminal, because the teams at the top are picking up 2.5 points per game. So if you're not, you're getting cut adrift from that race. But down at the bottom, everyone is poor, doesn't pick up a lot of points. It's very hard to get cut adrift. So I'm not worried at all about Luton, but I do agree and take Sam's point that so far, based on what I've seen, they need a bit of finishing potion, because they've had moments and they haven't taken those chances, and then they're unlikely to create loads of them. So when they come, they need to be taken. My concern is with the work that those strikers put in physically, the amount of ground they cover. That's Adebayo, that's Morris, that's Brown. I personally believe, and I don't know if data backs this up, that players like that have a tougher time in terms of finishing, and the sorts of players that underperform their XG, I think, generally are guys who are putting in a ton of work outside and are just fatigued, basically, physically and mentally, more so than those who are just ready to take first-time shots and don't do a lot else. So they could do with a bit of finishing potion, and they could do with Kaminsky making a few more saves. I don't think he's been terrible, but even half a mistake like the one against Fulham where he pushes out a cross and it gets tapped in, that undermines a good performance, and you can't have that sort of too often.
This huge game against Wolves, it's the kind of game where you look at it and you earmark it as one they potentially get 3 points. I think they probably take a point now just to get off the mark. That would be huge for them. But good luck to them, because like you said, they're not throwing everything at it. They're being sensible, and just the fact that they're even in the Premier League is a magnificent achievement. That does us for this week's podcast. Thanks to the chaps for joining me. It's been a pleasure to preview this Premier League game week with you. We'll be back next week to preview another Premier League game week. But in the meantime, if you could subscribe to the channel with your post notifications on, that would be absolutely excellent for us. Give the video a like and comment as well with your thoughts. Do you agree with some of the stuff we've said in this podcast? As I say, we'll be back next week. Tell all your friends and family about the pod. See you later.